Across the world, the number of new coronavirus infections continues to soar. We'll be looking at the pandemic in Europe, Asia, South America and Latin America. First, though, here's our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, on the figures globally.
There are now more than 21 million confirmed coronavirus cases around the world, and that figure is rising by more than 250,000 new cases every day. The global death toll now exceeds 750,000. In the past 24 hours, the World Health Organization recorded nearly 6,000 deaths linked to COVID-19. A grim statistic, and yet it is less than a quarter of the daily deaths globally from cancer. Worldwide, nearly 10 million people a year die from cancer. The number of new COVID infections in the 4 worst affected countries, the US, Brazil, Mexico and India, is trending upwards, and the death toll is rising too. More than 170,000 in the US and more than 50,000 in India.
Well, let's focus on Europe for a moment, which is trying to curb a surge in virus infections. The latest statistics are pretty bleak. You can see virus infections are going up in France, the UK, Italy and Germany. However, they're rising fastest in Spain. So let's take a closer look at Spain. 4 more Spanish regions have introduced tougher restrictions following La Rioja and Murcia on Sunday. Nightclubs have been closed and restaurants and bars have to shut by 1 a.m. Smoking outdoors in public places is banned if social distancing can't be maintained. Next to Lebanon, where virus cases have surged after that deadly blast in the port. More than 400 new cases were recorded on Sunday and 6 deaths. In the past few hours, Lebanon's caretaker health minister has called for a 2-week lockdown. Hamad Hassan told Voice of Lebanon Radio, "We declare today a state of general alert and we need a brave decision to close the country." He's called it a matter of life and death and warned both private and public hospitals might soon run out of space. The crisis has been made worse by the blast on August the 4th. It's thought half of healthcare facilities in Beirut are no longer functional. And here's another reminder that COVID-19 hits the most vulnerable. The UN tells us 4 Palestinian refugees have died of COVID-19 in camps over the weekend. It's warning things may get out of control there. Well, let's move to Asia now, and a reminder of those 2 shocking figures out of India. The official estimate of total deaths has now passed 50,000. Cases have been doubling every 21 days. They've now over 2.6 million of them. That's the 3rd highest in the world. Testing has been ramped up. These mobile testing vans are being used to access packed neighbourhoods in Delhi. We're told over 500,000 COVID tests are being carried out every day across India. Here's Divya Arya in Uttar Pradesh.
The Prime Minister addressed the citizens in his Independence Day speech over the weekend and told them that 3 vaccines are being developed indigenously for COVID, and also that healthcare facilities have been spruced up, including local production of PPE kits. The government also points out that India has one of the lowest COVID mortality rates globally at less than 2%. But in poorer states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, where I am and where the numbers continue to rise, public health care still leaves a lot to be desired, and private health facilities for COVID patients continue to be unaffordable for many. Now, the whole economy has been easing restrictions in a bid to kickstart employment and demand. But many states have been forced to reintroduce partial lockdowns owing to the increasing numbers, leading to a lot of confusion. Even in the capital, Delhi, and adjoining areas, the compliance to wearing masks is low, and I have found when I have visited low-income localities that social distancing is almost impossible. The media has also continuously reported hospitals refusing admission for non-COVID patients, in some cases even leading to their deaths.
Well, from India over to South Korea, which is dealing with its biggest daily jump in coronavirus cases in months. Many of them have been linked to this Sarang Jae-il Christian church in Seoul. The area has been taped off and these signs are telling people not to enter. More than 3,400 church members are in quarantine. Local media tell us that the church leader, Reverend Jung Kwang-hoon, has tested positive for the virus. He's a fierce critic of President Moon Jae-in. The Reverend had attended a rally over the weekend defying a ban on large gatherings. Okay, let's go to Australia, which has seen its deadliest day of the pandemic. The state of Victoria recorded 25 deaths in 24 hours, while there were 282 confirmed cases. Here's our Australia correspondent, Shai McAleal.
22 of those cases are linked to aged care outbreaks. A large chunk, actually, of the deaths and of the cases in Victoria have been linked to aged care facilities that are actually now seen as a crisis within the crisis of the state of Victoria. In Melbourne, to be specific, with calls to get this under control. Another thing that's troubling health officials and people in Melbourne as well is that the number of unknown, where the source is unknown, some mystery cases, if you will, that's also growing. It's at 150 now. And the trouble with that is that as the number rises of the cases where you don't know where the source is, that means more community transmission cases are likely to pop up, and they're harder to control.
Well, one British man has been making the most of having to quarantine after returning to Australia from the UK. He's jogged 60 kilometres in his tiny hotel room and raised money for charity. And he's been speaking to the BBC.
Look, it wasn't as bad as you might think. 60 kilometres sounds quite a lot. It's about 37 miles, I think. But I'm in here 14 days, so I just kind of broke it up, maybe 5, 6, 10 kilometres a day. Had a few rest days as well. So it wasn't too bad, actually. Just put the music in the ears and just go for it. There are security guards at the end of each corridor, so nobody's allowed to leave their room. So it's literally from the door, running to the window, and then a sharp left turn around the corner of the bed to the wall and back again. So each lap is about between 10 and 11 steps.
Well, neighbouring New Zealand has postponed its general election by a month as it deals with the new virus outbreak. Instead of taking place on September the 19th, the vote will be held on October the 17th. Here's the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern.
Ultimately, the 17th of October, in approximately 9 weeks' time, provides sufficient time for parties to plan around the range of circumstances we could be campaigning under, for the Electoral Commission to prepare, and for voters to feel assured of a safe, accessible and credible election.
From New Zealand to South Africa now, which is easing its coronavirus restrictions for a second time. Domestic travel, small family gatherings are now allowed. Businesses can reopen and alcohol and cigarettes can now be bought. Now, there were protests when President Cyril Ramaphosa reintroduced the controversial ban on alcohol and cigarettes in July. This one was in Cape Town. The president argued the move would take pressure off the national healthcare system. Well, the virus figures aren't good. South Africa has recorded more than half of coronavirus infections in Africa, with more than 570,000 cases and 11,500 deaths. Latin America is still the epicentre of the pandemic overall. Total cases in the region have now passed 6 million. We've got updates on Chile, Bolivia. First, though, Peru. It reported more than 10,000 new infections on Sunday, a record high. In total, there have been more than 500,000 cases. Many of the dead are being buried on this hillside cemetery in Lima. More than 26,000 people have died in the country. Well, Peru's southern neighbour, Bolivia, is also struggling. It's now past 100,000 cases of COVID-19. Another 4,000 people have died. And we're told the pandemic hasn't reached its peak there yet. Well, the latest victim was Esther Morales, the sister of the former president Evo Morales, who posted this picture and a tribute to her on Twitter. She died in hospital on Sunday. While neighbouring Chile is lifting one of the world's longest lockdowns in parts of its capital, Santiago. Businesses can gradually reopen in the central business district and small groups are able to gather. Masks are compulsory and social distancing rules are being enforced, and Chile's borders remain closed to all foreigners. Rafael Rojas covers Latin America for BBC Monitoring and is in Miami. Thanks very much for coming on the programme. So
Thank you.
So what do you make? I mean, it's still, this whole area, we should point out, is still the epicentre of the pandemic. But let's start in Chile. What do you make of what's happening there?
The situation in Chile is definitely positive. At least that's what the government has said. But it's still too early to tell because Chile is heading to an election, a plebiscite, to decide whether the country will have a new constitution on 25th October. But there is no knowing whether they will be able to hold an election with a pandemic, and if these low numbers will hold until October.
And let's move to Peru then. Devastating numbers there, huge numbers of the outbreak, and difficulty again in the political handling of it.
The Peruvian case is very, very particular because in Peru, the government has had to reimpose new isolation measures. People cannot go out during the weekends, and this has been added to a political crisis in which the government of Martín Vizcarra changed his cabinet twice, and Congress did not approve the first time around of his new prime minister and his new cabinet. So the Peruvian government is now expecting that this second prime minister, who started last week, will be able to fulfill his duties.
Interesting. And you're speaking to us from Miami, and there is interest in the American kind of Donald Trump administration's involvement in the region here.
Yeah, the situation right now in Latin America, there have been some reports, specifically in Colombia and in Panama, talking about the involvement of the U.S. in Latin America, especially looking towards the election. Right now, one of Donald Trump's key advisors, Mauricio Claver Carone, is visiting Colombia after having visited Panama, and he is considered to be the Donald Trump pick for the head of the Inter-American Development Bank, which is a key position that has always been held by a Latin American national.